Dr. Lance, welcome and thank you for participating in Texas Archaeology Month. For those of you who may not know Dr. Christopher Lentz, he recently retired as the Wildlife Division Archaeologist at the Texas Parks and Wildlife, and is currently a research associate with Texas State University in San Marcos. Dr. Lentz received his doctorate in anthropology from the University of Oklahoma in 1984. His research interests have focused on the Southern High Plains with an emphasis on ecological anthropology involving paleo-environmental reconstruction, technological trends in lithic resource extraction and tool manufacture, ceramic technology, and exchange interaction across the Southern Plains region with adjacent areas. His most recent publications discuss behavior surrounding 4 prehistoric lithic caches below the Llano Estacado caprock, decorated cord marked pottery from the Conley Peak site in Motley County, technological studies of cord marked pottery from several sites on the BLM Crossbar Ranch, and the distribution and temporal variations in the occurrence of obsidian across Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Drew. Today, I'm going to talk about the importance of Alibates Chert found in the Texas Panhandle, and I've got 8 topics that I want to try to cover. Obviously, we're going to start with the low level of discussion of the subject. So we're going to talk about the importance of chert, prehistory, where Alibates occurs and how it is formed, how prehistoric people acquired the chert, the range of products and implements used, the preferential direction and extent of trade of Alibates, and the combined use of both Alibates and pottery variability to reflect regional interactions among the people in the Southern Plains. Differences in house size and ceramics implies that the buried city complex, which is actually in the northeast part of the Texas Panhandle, perhaps represents a rendezvous or trade fair or a Calumet locale with a development of trade partners for the exchange of Alibates. And finally, that these trade partners evolve into fictive kinship relationships with these distant people that took in the Antelope Creek people on a family level grapes of wrath migration to the southern Kansas during the regional abandonment of the Panhandle during the prolonged drought of 1450 to 1490 AD. So with that, the importance of chert is that by and large, North American people did not have access to metallurgy, with the exception of people in the Northwest coast and around the Great Lakes, which used copper nuggets and pounded them into various materials, and the people in northwest Mexico that made copper bells, things like this. By and large, this is a low technology cold hammer manufacturing method, and they, for the most part, they did not understand smelting. So how do you convert a bison to usable products if you don't have metal knives or even arrowheads of metal? Well, the answer, of course, is flint. And that's what today's topic is going to be about. There are many kinds of volcanic and sedimentary rocks that are suitable for making stone tools. And these include some illustrated here as obsidian glass, Edwards Plateau chert, basalts, Alibates flint, orthoquartzite, novaculite, petrified wood. A lot of other kinds of stones like sandstones and limestones do not retain sharp edges and cannot be used to manufacture stone tools. For the Southern High Plains, there's more than 130 kinds of cherts that occur, but the ones that are illustrated on this map on the right are the dominant ones. And these include the Edwards chert that occurs in a 280-kilometer east-west area of southern Texas. Tecovas is an alignment of various outcrops from northeast New Mexico down to around Motley County, Texas. Alibates chert, which is today's topic, and primarily the Flint Hills chert of Kansas extending into northern Oklahoma. The rocks that became Alibates chert were originally Dolomite, and they date to or Permian in age. They date 250 to 300 million years ago. And We refer to these as a Alibates member of the Quartermaster Formation. This was an intertidal zone of carbonate-rich salt flats when the sediments were deposited. And you can see some Permian type animals walking on kinds of salt flats that might have been the situation when the Dolomites were formed. There are two Dolomite members that are separated by 5 feet of a shale deposit that occur throughout the Panhandle. And the conversion of Dolomite to Alibates Chert can occur in one deposit, the other deposit, or both of them. So how does that happen? Well, certification of Alibates Dolomite is a secondary replacement of silica from the overlying formations, mostly the Ogallala formations. Ogallala are the deposits that came as outwash sand, gravels, and rocks when the Rocky Mountains uplifted and started eroding to the east. We also have contributions from various volcanic ashes that may be dissolved by groundwater and moved through the sediments where they reform in pretty dense deposits in lower formations. In the Texas Panhandle, we have both Tecovas Chert and Alibates Chert. They're of different time periods, and yet they're probably formed by the same kinds of formations, the process of translocation of silica. The cherts that occur, pure chert is 90 to 95% silica, and so it's almost a total replacement. The map in the upper right corner is the distribution of the Permian deposits in Texas. And studies have shown that sampling of 20 different locations in this basin, only 2 areas on either side of the Canadian River have pure chert deposits in bedrock forms. In many of the other areas, we do get little bits of Alibates that are called beads or spheroids. The picture with the quarter next to it gives you some idea of the size of the chert that occurs over most of the Permian deposits that occur. So really, we just have 2 areas that produce the big boulders of Alibates flint in the Texas Panhandle. Now, the Canadian River, which formed during the uprise of the Rocky Mountains some 55 to 80 million years ago, drained the Rocky Mountains onto the east. And in the process of eroding into the sediments that form there, the Canadian River has downcut through Tecovas and Alibates deposits, which have already become certified. And the river system continues eastward over the last 2 million years. And so we find during the Pleistocene that you can find chertable deposits ranging from boulders on the west to small pebbles on the east that can be recovered over 450 miles from the outwash gravels all the way to Lake Eufaula and even the Arkansas River on the east. And Alibates from these high terraces were used as stone tools even by the Caddo Indians in East Texas or eastern Oklahoma. So when we talk about Alibates flint, it's more than just the 2 bedrock outcrops. It is the 450 miles of terrace deposits that also provide resources to be exploited. Alibates was a favored toolstone used throughout throughout prehistory. At least 12,000 years is what we have diagnostic artifacts. It probably goes back a lot earlier than that. And it's used by all groups from the earliest Paleo-Indian people up to the introduction of metal artifacts during the historic period. And I want to just throw this one in to show you that basically it's the people on the high plains that were using Alibates. And it was widely dispersed during the Paleo-Indian period. Some people have suggested that the banding of the red and color might reflect a magical symbol of blood, procurement, I don't hold a lot of stock in that, but it's interesting that the banding of both the white and the red look an awful lot like marbled cuts of meat that might be used. So there might have been some magical relationship and why it was one of the favored types of cherts that were used. So why do you quarry chert when you have so much access to surface rocks and cobbles extending down the rivers? Well, chert is exposed to ultraviolet sunlight radiation, and it develops a weathered cortex on the surface. And it also tends to develop fissures and with water seeping in, freezes and fractures pretty badly. The air exposed chert and surface rocks lose water, and they adversely affect the napping characteristics of making stone tools. The type of chert that is buried, never exposed to sunlight or air, retain the water and tend to be a lot better napping material for making quality stone tools. But clearly buried chert is inherently a better quality. It's a labor-intensive extraction process, which is not cheap or quick, cheap in terms of labor. So basically you need to have, when you get into quarrying activities, you have to have the social and political organization for the deployment of labor. You have to have the logistical support of the quarrymen. That is, you got to feed, care for them, house them while they're doing the work. And they have to have the knowledge, skill, and specialized quarrying technology for making stone tools to extract the chert. The only people that really have this technology, that is large evidence of large communities nearby that will have a population to support quarrymen, involve the Middle Ceramic period on the Southern Plains. This map shows a number of cultures that we've defined across the Southern Plains region, and the dark black mark denotes the areas of cultures that predominantly used cord-marked pottery. So we're talking about during the Middle Ceramic period of people that are clearly Plains Indians and not Southwest Indians. And it's also interesting to note that this area also circumscribes the cultures that relate historically to people that spoke the Plains Caddoan languages. And historically, those are the Arikara, the Pawnee, and Wichita, and Keachai are the dominant ones we recognize today. So, except for the Apishapa, which is the orange group up in Colorado, most of these other cultures share an awful lot of tool forms, including the knives, the scrapers, the globular pottery form, and particularly the rich bone technology of people during the Middle Ceramic period. The Antelope Creek people are the Middle Ceramic period that encompass the quarry area of Alibates. And they occupied between AD 1200 and 1500. And they lived in semi-sedentary communities scattered along the Canadian River extending into the Oklahoma Panhandle. Typically, they have houses with stone slab foundations around houses, and they have a very distinctive form of house that involves a center depressed floor channel that is about a foot lower than the so-called benches that flank the north and south sides of these rooms. Doorways are always off to the east, and there's often a platform or altar on the west side. This type of house occurs not only among the Antelope Creek people, but is found in the buried city complex we'll be talking about, and further in northeast Oklahoma. The Zims complex has the center channel, but does not have the masonry foundations of this architecture style. The Antelope Creek stone technology in pottery is interesting. It's classic late Middle Ceramic artifact types that's found throughout the region. And what's interesting is that the pottery of most Antelope Creek areas, particularly around the quarry, almost shows no decorations whatsoever. They're globular jars. Often they'll have crusts of carbon on the outside from grease production of bison. But you see that these people are horticulturalists. They're growing corns, beans, squash, using tibia digging sticks. They also use bison scapula hose, the shoulder blade of a bison. And most of their tool technologies are derived from Alibates Chert. So who controlled the quarries? Well, the Alibates National Monument encompasses just the exposure on the south side of the Canadian River. In this area, we've mapped 729 quarry pits around the rim of one drainage. And the largest Antelope Creek site, which was dug by the WPA in the 1930s, is only 1.6 kilometers, about 1 mile away from the quarries. Easy access if you use drainage systems to travel from the quarries to the main site. The quarry pits themselves tend to be circular. They have various sizes from just a foot or two across to ones that are 20 or more feet in diameter. The pits involve considerable labor. It has to have clearly residential people to be supported while they dig the Alibates. And the absence of permanent sites by earlier and later groups of people suggests that these earlier and later groups scavenged their flint from the river gravels and were not involved in the quarry operations. At the materials recovered by the WPA from Alibates Ruin 28, we have a number of distinctive tool forms that have not been very carefully studied as yet. A lot of them are shanked or mattocks-like chipstone implements that are probably used for digging, but the types of implements used clearly suitable for doing quarrying activities involve the hafted bison tibia digging sticks. They're using deer or elk antler tine wedges. I've included a picture of an elk antler pick, but none have been found yet in the culture. Most likely a lot of what is being used are wooden digging sticks and pry bars, and these are not typically preserved. Plus hammerstones are used to shape and break up the overlying deposits that are found in quarries. This is an excavation of 1/2 of a quarry pit that was conducted by Paul and Susanna Cates. And I've highlighted certain zones and areas about this thing. It looks very confusing, but let me walk you through this. In the middle of the photograph, the upper overlying material is a white dolomite bedrock. And towards the base of that is a dark chert. That's the Alibates. Not all Alibates is red and white. It can come in some varieties of colors. So you have the dark chert below it. And in half of the excavated pit, the area to the left represents a profile of the excavations. And you can see a lot of rubble of angular stones that have been backfilled into the quarry pit, with a top layer being covered by windblown and probably rain-washed fine sediments that reflect abandonment after the people have left the area. What's interesting about this particular quarry pit is that the Cates identified 3 platform entry steps marked in white circles that'll allow you to step down and get into the quarry pit so you can get access to the flint. And then around the perimeter, you can see the discard rubble, the debris they left behind around the area. But this is probably the best model we have of how quarry pits were opened and the flint extracted. Alibates Ruin 28, like I said, is about 1 mile away from the quarries, and it was excavated in the 1930s through 1941. The buildings date, they're in 2 areas. The northern area is a contiguous room structure of 22 rooms all in one building. And then 150 feet to the south was a larger excavation area, largely consisting of isolated room residential structures. The interesting thing about the contiguous room structure to the north was that there's a substantial mound that was built over the houses after that room was abandoned, but while the people were still occupying the southern part of the site. And we know this because in the excavations, we have rooms that have walls that are still standing 72 centimeters tall, 6 feet tall, 6 feet 3 inches tall. And those walls still have mud plaster on the side of it. Since this is an open site, 650 years of rain and weather would not preserve the retention of the adobe on the face of the wall. So this room block was abandoned and the rooms are filled in with dirt. It also turns out that there were a number of bodies that were buried in the mound that occur above the original floor surface of this particular structure. But most tellingly is that in room 20, there was a superimposed wall structure. Base of the wall was 4 feet above the original house floor. This tells us that most likely, not only was this a mound feature, but there was likely a house built on top of the structure. And this probably reflects a council leader or someone in charge, possibly of both the deployment of the excavations as well as the shaping and maybe even the exchange of Alibates material. So we've got very clear evidence of some rudimentary hierarchy of people involved in the Alibates Ruin 28. The kinds of commodities that were being fashioned for exchange involve everything from trimmed quarry blanks that are essentially bifacial in form to large bifacial preformed knives to final Harahay form knives, which is the diamond-shaped knife in the center, bottom, middle. We also have examples of chipstone axes that are used for architectural construction, and as well as scrapers. And there's also things I like to differentiate between a tool chest, which is a wide variety of finished tools all combined together, probably in one pouch, as opposed to flake blanks. And flake blanks just mean they selected large flakes for exchange. We have 85 recorded caches from the southern plains that contain Alibates flint. Many of them are pure Alibates. Now at Alibates Ruin 28, the large quarry blanks were sometimes found in clusters like the middle picture here. And these, we have a total of 288 quarry blanks of the 416 quarry blanks that were excavated in the excavations by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s. The distribution of these quantities of quarry blanks are depicted in the two maps. And what you'll notice is that the greatest concentration of these quarry blanks do not occur inside the rooms, but they occur around the periphery of the contiguous room structure on the north side. And my interpretation is that these were areas that were being compiled for distribution and shipment off for exchange purposes. And they were occurring around the base of the mound after it was constructed. So whoever was residing on top of the mound likely controlled the access and accumulation of the stuff prior to its shipment and exchange. The 85 flint caches containing Alibates are depicted in this diagram of maps. We also have 31 of caches in Potter County, another 13 in Hutchinson County that are 100% Alibates, and a few that have mostly Alibates. But caches tend to expand a little bit to the west, but notice they go to the northeast, and they also occur down the Canadian River to the directly east of the quarry location. There's a vast amount of literature in archaeology about the trade of Alibates between the people in the Texas Panhandle and the Puebloan people in the Southwest. And that's because when you're working in the Texas Panhandle, it's easy to spot turquoise, painted pottery, shell jewelry, and quantities of obsidian among the local materials that are found out there. But if we look closely at how much is actually going to the Southwest in terms of total raw materials, there is no site in eastern New Mexico dating to this time period that accounts for more than 5% Alibates. There is hardly any Alibates that's moving and being absorbed by the people of eastern New Mexico or the Puebloans. In contrast, if we look in other directions, we see that there's a tremendous amount of Alibates that's going off to the northeast. And this is a location of all the sites, or a fair number of sites that are of this time period, as well as the percent of Alibates that occurs. So the yellow and orange demarked area constitute a region in which Alibates consists of 50% or more of the flint resources used by the people residing in these sites. Now, one of the sites that has a lot of Alibates is the Stamper site in the Oklahoma Panhandle, which was excavated in 1932 and 1933. There's more than 20 houses that were dug during that time period. And you can see that from the photos at the lower end, we have stone masonry foundation slabs, just like the ones in central Texas. And the picture to the left, it clearly shows a center channel, but the people mistook a plaster lining on the benches as interior walls, and they excavated through the bench area on the outside. So these are classic Antelope Creek kind of houses that occur up in that area. The interesting thing about the Stamper site communities, they've recovered more than 7,000 potsherds during their excavations in 1933, 1934. And in pawing through those collections, you can see there's a wide range of decorations that occur on the rim and the lip of the pots. By and large, these are mostly cord marked pots. There are a few of them are plainwares that occur in the area. So as I mentioned before, the pottery around the quarries, Alibates Ruin 28, has almost no decorations whatsoever. And here we are at Stamper with a tremendous range of variability in decorations showing up on the pottery. If we go to the Buried City area, which is in northeast Texas Panhandle, again, we see we have a fair density of sites for about 20 miles from the outcrop of the water at the headwaters. For about the first 20 miles, we have pure water flowing down Wolf Creek. It's one of two sweetwater creeks in the Panhandle. Most of the ones flowing east are gyp water deposits that are not suitable for occupations. You can see from the Kit Corson house that we've got masonry foundations, but notice that the stone slabs in this structure are oriented perpendicular to the wall axis. The structure does have a center depressed floor channel and an interior altar, and it's got a contiguous room structure like we start seeing other things. The interesting thing about the Buried City complex is that of the pottery that's been found on a half dozen or so major excavated sites, about 4% of the pottery is decorated in a variety of methods. And I honestly don't know if the 4% represents the number of rim sherds or the total pottery assemblages, but there's a real difference in the amount of decorated pottery that occurs here. The other thing I want to point out is that the sizes of the Buried City sites on the lower left are the sizes of individual houses down there. And you can see that by and large, Corson A is a 17.2 square meter structure, but the rest of them range from about 64 square meters up to 154 square meters in size. Compare that to the Antelope Creek sites around the quarries, and their houses range from 14 to 48 size. So these houses are oftentimes 4 times larger than in the buried city area than we have around the quarry areas. So when we look at the distribution of Alibates on the map extending into Wilmore, Pratt, and Bluff Creek complexes in particular, it's interesting to note that these same cultures have a high incidence of decorated pottery in the same general style and motifs that we're starting to see in the buried city and north, in the north, that is in Stamper site. But we have none of those decorations showing up in the central part of the Antelope Creek culture area. There's been some preliminary studies of the paste characteristics of pottery found in the Panhandle area, and these are just provisional studies that have been done. They need to be supplemented by larger areas to understand what's going on here. But the provisional petrographic identification was based on 85 potsherds from 14 sites that I separate into 4 separate areas. And I separate the buried city area from the, in green, from the yellow sites on the Canadian River, in large part because we know of the large houses excavated buried city. We don't know full house sizes of the ones down on the eastern part of the Texas Panhandle on the Canadian. And what you're seeing here is that there is less diversity in pottery temper for Alibates Ruin 28 and Antelope Creek 22, which are the 2 type sites for the culture, when you compare it to the diversity of temper types identified in the pottery from the Oklahoma Panhandle, the buried city, or the Canadian River on the eastern edge of the Panhandle. In addition, we've also done some, I've got a mistake here. This is, that should say provisional neutron activation identification of temper ceramics. The pottery has been subjected to neutron activation analysis, which is exposing it to radiation. And from this, you can identify the elements that are in the clay of the pottery. And then through statistical management, you can group these into various populations of pottery types. And what we see is that we have 13 neutron activation analysis groups that occur in these same general areas. And I want to point out that in this case, it looks like the greatest diversity is actually occurring around the quarries. But when you look at the buried city, the green one, we only have one single NAA group, but it's represented by 4 potsherds from 3 sites. What I'm suggesting is that we have inadequately sampled and studied the neutron activation analysis to make any kind of common sense out of how the pottery is behaving using this particular method. So when we compare the buried city complex from the Antelope Creek, we see how they differ in several ways. One is that Antelope Creek has a variable to high density of sites up and down the Canadian, whereas the buried city complex for the first 20 miles where the water is sweet, we have an exceedingly high population of sites up and down the area. The room sizes tend to be small in Antelope Creek, much, much larger in buried city. Ceramic decorations are extremely rare in the heartland of Antelope Creek, and they're moderately common in the buried city, and they tend to mirror the ones from southern Kansas complex. The ceramic temper shows little variation in Antelope Creek, but a whole lot of variation in the buried city as well as the Stamper site. And we cannot define conclusive decisions about neutron activation analysis at this time. Nevertheless, both the buried city and Antelope Creek have houses with stone foundations, the center floor channel, the quartermark pottery, similar stone tools, similar bone tools, and a high incidence of Alibates usage. It's also interesting to note that the buried city complex is intermediate between Alibates quarries and the complexes in Kansas. So the hypothesis that we need to develop and test is that the buried city complex perhaps represents the ones in the Oklahoma Panhandle are specialized Calumet, which are ceremonial sites. They're rendezvous or trade fairs. The Calumet were specialized ceremonies that developed around the AD 1200 that involved the smoking of pipes, particularly redstone, but also involved primarily the exchange of food to help people get through the severe droughts that were plaguing much of the North America during this time period. We believe it started around 1200 AD and moved forward. But I want to point out that what I'm suggesting is the buried city is the ideal place for conducting the feasts, for hosting exchanges of Alibates, of food products, salt, and other goods, because the rooms are larger, they can accommodate visitors from the Kansas area. It's a place to meet trade partners and create a fictive kinship relationships with these distant people. And the other aspect about Buried City is that it's a gateway community. That is, it not only allows materials to flow out, but it restricts the people from Kansas from getting into the quarry areas. And that restriction prevents the decorated pottery from getting directly into the Panhandle. It's sort of the intermediate exchange area that's occurring through the area. Okay, so what happened to the Antelope Creek people? Well, we know from tree ring interpretation data on the far left that the period from about 1250 from 1400 to 1490, we had a severe drought that reached what's called the Palmer Index drought level 3 that lasted for almost 50 years. And during that time period, that's far in excess of what the Dust Bowl people experienced historically. But this is immediately followed by the abandonment of the Antelope Creek people in the Panhandle. And what we have trouble is that it's difficult to find everyone picking up and moving as one cohesive unit and setting up Antelope Creek in a new area. And what we're suggesting is that the drought decimated the agricultural base as well as other products of the people, and that more than likely, most of the people moved to join the cultures of South Central Kansas on a grapes of wrath type, family by family, individual movement into the area. I do want to point out, however, that on the Republican River of Nebraska, there are 4 bands of the Pawnee Indians. Remember, they speak the same languages, family, as the Wichita, as the people making quartermark pottery. But the Skiddy were the westernmost band. They were regionally separated. They spoke a separate language, dialect. And there was an origin myth that they claim they came from the Southwest where they once lived in stone houses. More than likely, if we have anything like a culture unit intrusion of people moving north en masse, it would be the Skiddy Pawnee band moving up to become Pawnee Indians. But most of these people are moving to join the Kansas folks, and ultimately they evolve into Wichita bands. So, in summary, Alibates flint quarrying activities are unique to Antelope Creek Phase. The people have logistical support that is not found in any other groups residing in the Panhandle area. The exchange does not favor massive exchange with the Puebloans to the southwest, but rather the flint is primarily going to Kansas. The details of interaction are being delineated by the decorations of quartermark pottery coupled by tempers and clays. And the exchange might be among trade partners who provided economic support during food shortages caused by the intermittent droughts of the entire time period. The droughts, perhaps intrusions of new people might have led to the demise of Antelope Creek people around 1500. Those new people, by the way, are Athabascans, who are the Apachean people we know historically. Most Antelope Creek people did not abandon their region as a collective unit, but instead moved on an individual family basis to join trade partners in South Central Kansas and Nebraska. This is clearly a hypothesis. The whole idea of Buried City and Stamper being trade fairs are testable hypotheses that we can glean information from by studying the decorations of pottery and the distributions of particular pottery motifs, coupled with further neutron activation analysis and petrographic study of the pottery to solidify the ideas of the interaction among these various groups. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Chris. I have a few questions if you have a moment. Where the reduction of the raw material, the alibates, is occurring in regards to the production of blanks. So after extracting the raw material from the quarry pit itself, are they then furthering reducing that on site, or are they moving the raw material to these larger sites before actually producing the blanks?
Some of the quarry blanks might be made close to the quarries, but the vast majority of products being shipped off are occurring in the villages.
So where do you find most of the lithic debitage, the cortical and the primary flakes?
Well, I probably should have pointed out the picture of the quarry has got a huge ring around it of all the debris from the excavations. A lot of that is flint. And so there's some production here, but they're not doing final shaping. We don't have, we have lots of hammerstones, but we do not, and those hammerstones are used for breaking up the rocks to gain access to the flint. But we do not see a whole lot of retouched material or final production. All they're doing is taking out material, perhaps rough shaping a single sinuous edge around the perimeter of the stone and shipping them back to the community for reduction and or direct shipment out. So a lot of the flint napping occurs in the villages. There's a number of the quarries, the number of the caches that we find are particularly of caches of flake blanks, are items that were selected in the village by the flint nappers themselves.
All right, and are they heat treating alibates?
In some cases, the answer is yes. It's coarse enough that it should be heat treated. Heat treatment is the process of heating up the nodules in usually within a layer of sand that allows the heat to be raised gently and lowered slowly. And what you're doing is almost melting the large crystals within the rock and making the flint finer grained, so you have better control over the flint napping, the direction and the reducing the problems in the production of stone tools. So that's what that's what heat treatment does. If you have alibates that you put directly in a fire, not only do you have excessive heating occurring too quickly, that will cause differential expansion of the flint, and you will get dish-shaped areas called pot lids that'll bust out of the stone. It'll ruin the stone completely. And on top of that, the stone will change its color from the banded white and red, or white and blue predominantly, to black and gray color. So flint found in burned houses, for example, that's clearly not a heat treatment process, but you do not have to do heat treatment on all alibates, but it can improve the quality of the flint napping through heat treatment processes.
All right, and lastly, you discussed that it doesn't seem as though there was a big emphasis of folks trading Alibates into the Southwest region in eastern New Mexico. As you see with the movement of Alibates to the Northeast into Kansas and whatnot. So is it possible that rather than Alibates, maybe there is an emphasis of trading bison products into the Southwest in exchange for things like shell and turquoise?
Absolutely, but again, the amounts of Southwest materials at most sites is real small. The turquoise and shell primarily occur as jewelry, oftentimes found in burial contexts, or occasionally items lost on site. The greatest density of obsidian found, again, occurs at Alibates Ruin 28, where more than 4,000 pieces of obsidian were found at that site. The question arises then, if the people are sitting on top of a mountain of Alibates, why do we have obsidian coming into the area? And the answer to this question is that the goods that are coming in are token gifts that cement trade partner relationships. You exchange redundant materials and not complementary materials for your trade partners. The people in the Southwest were trade partners with some of the people in Antelope Creek, and I interpret the redundancy of the goods to signify gift giving. The painted pottery from the Southwest is gift wrapping. It's the pretty material that you find. No painted pots have ever been found in burial contexts in Antelope Creek to date. The pots are rare. You can hold virtually most of the Southwest pottery in a knapsack from all the sites in Antelope Creek that are found so far. So it's not a great abundance of material from the Southwest that actually shows up on the Antelope Creek sites.
All right, well, Chris, I want to thank you again. And for any of our viewers that may have questions for Dr. Lentz, please include them in the comment section below.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.